All right, so welcome to another deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at some post-apocalyptic fiction
Okay.
from a story called 2035 by the Appalachian Gorilla. It's on Substack. This is just one chapter from that,
Hmm.
but it really throws us into this world that has collapsed and resources are scarce,
Right.
and danger is around every corner. And this chapter focuses on Tom. He's a father really dedicated to protecting his family
Yeah.
in this brutal new world that they're living in.
It's a great premise. I'm always interested to see how authors take these kinds of post-collapse scenarios
Yeah.
and kind of use it as a way to explore human nature and what happens when people are put under pressure.
Exactly. And this chapter really doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
It starts with Tom waking up from a dream, but he's injured. He's got a swollen eye and a busted lip and bruised ribs.
Oh, wow.
And as it turns out, this dream was a flashback to a journey that he took with his daughter, Bella, through the woods, and she had been shot.
Oh, geez. So it's a pretty intense sequence to start out with. Just the emotional weight of the dream is almost palpable,
Right.
between the love that he has for Bella and the setting, the winter setting, and this constant fear
Mm.
of running into these slavers. It
Yeah.
really just creates this powerful sense of dread
Yeah.
and this urgency for them to get to where they're going.
And it gets even more intense because in the dream, she actually succumbs to her injury. She
Mhm.
dies. And Tom, fueled by grief and rage, brutally murders the slaver that he believes is responsible.
Mhm.
And it is graphic, but it really highlights the lengths that he'll go to protect his family.
It's like this glimpse into kind of our primal instincts, like what happens when society and all those rules are gone.
Yeah.
He's really just operating in the survival mode, and his main driving force is just to protect his own.
But here's where it gets really interesting. So he wakes up from this violent, emotionally charged dream,
Yeah.
and he almost just shrugs off his real life injuries. And he even makes a joke about, how people worry too much.
Yeah.
I mean, he just committed a murder in his dream, but in reality, he's way more concerned with having breakfast.
So that juxtaposition is really unsettling.
Yeah.
Like, what do we take away from that? Is that a sign that he's become desensitized to violence because of this new world?
Right.
Or is that I'm more inclined to see that as a coping mechanism.
Okay.
If you think about the psychological trauma that he has to be carrying with him,
Yeah.
this dream might be the way that he compartmentalizes
Okay.
all of those horrors
Right.
so that he's able to actually function in his day-to-day life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because he can't really afford to dwell in that darkness all the time, or else he would just be paralyzed by it. So it's almost like he's created this psychological pressure valve
Yeah,
to release some of that tension.
exactly. Exactly. And that pressure valve, his dream, it reveals some really fundamental things about him.
Yeah.
We see that he's capable of extreme violence.
Right.
But it's all stemming from this really deep, almost animalistic urge to protect his family.
Yeah.
He's not a cold-blooded killer. He's a man who's driven to these lengths because of love and desperation
Mm.
in a world where all the rules have been rewritten.
Yeah, it's a very complex portrayal of a character for sure.
Yeah.
And it really makes you question, is he a hero in this story? Is he an anti-hero? Is he something else entirely?
Right. That's the question that really keeps you reading, right?
Mm.
And, I think the Appalachian Gorilla, he does this deliberately.
Yeah.
He's ambiguous with how he presents Tom
Yeah.
so that we as readers are left to wrestle with, how complex he is
Mhm.
and with the difficult choices that he makes.
Mhm.
He can't easily be categorized.
Right.
And I think that's what makes him so fascinating.
Absolutely. But there's another element that adds to this complexity, and that's the setting. So we talked about the characters, but the world that they inhabit really plays a crucial role in shaping their actions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Appalachian Gorilla does such a great job of painting this picture
Yeah.
of this society that's been completely ravaged
Yeah.
and nature's starting to kind of reclaim what was lost.
Mhm.
It's a bleak picture that he's painting. And the winter setting, the fact that it's winter really adds
Yeah.
to that sense of fragility and danger.
Yeah. It's like the environment itself reflects the internal struggles that the characters are going through. It's frozen, desolate, and it's a constant battle to survive.
Exactly. And that brings us to this recurring symbol in the chapter,
Oh, yeah.
which is the creek.
Okay.
And it appears both in the dream and when he's awake. And it's a place of beauty,
Mhm.
but it's also a source of danger. So in the dream, it's this obstacle that separates him from safety.
Yeah.
And then in real life, it holds all of these memories
Yeah.
of happier times that he spent there with Bella.
I, I hadn't thought of it that way, but the creek really does become this representation
Right.
of the duality of this world.
Exactly.
The dangers and the possibilities,
Yeah.
the harshness and those little glimpses of peace.
And that duality is reflected in Tom himself.
Yeah.
He's both a protector, but he can also be destructive.
Right.
He's capable of great love, but also terrifying violence. So like the creek, he has that light and darkness within him.
So going back to that original question, is Tom a hero or something else? It seems like the Appalachian gorilla is really making us question those easy labels.
Yes.
Pushing us to look deeper and to see the shades of gray in a world where morality itself has been completely shaken.
That's what makes it so compelling, right?
Yeah.
It's not this simple good versus evil narrative.
Yeah.
He's forcing us to confront that darkness that we might all have inside of us.
Yeah.
And to really grapple with the choices that we would make if we were pushed to those limits.
Absolutely. And this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of Tom's story and the
Right.
world that he inhabits. And I'm definitely eager to dive a little bit deeper and see where the Appalachian gorilla takes us next. But before we move on, I want to ask you, the listener, based on what we've explored so far, what do you think motivates Tom's actions? Is it purely survival? Is it love for his family? Or is there something a little bit darker at play? It's just something to think about as we continue this deep dive.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you bring up motivation because that's something that stood out to me too. The Appalachian gorilla, he uses such intense language when he's describing the violence in this chapter.
Yeah.
But he never feels like it's just there for shock value.
Yeah.
It feels like it has a purpose.
Mm.
It's to show us just how far Tom's willing to go.
Right.
And the depths of his rage and his protectiveness.
I agree. And it is unsettling, but it feels authentic to the world that he's living in.
Right.
Like there's just this rawness to the writing that makes you feel the weight of every single action and every decision that he makes.
And it highlights that emotional detachment that he's developed.
Yeah.
Which is both fascinating and disturbing at the same time.
Right.
Like it really speaks to that psychological burden that he's carrying.
Yeah.
And how he's had to just shut down certain emotions just to function and survive.
It's like when he burns the slavers' motorcycles at the creek.
Right.
It's such a symbolic act, almost like a cleansing ritual.
Right.
But he's so calm when he's doing it, like he's just tending a fire for warmth.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how much of his humanity has he had to sacrifice to adapt to this brutal new world.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Has he actually become desensitized to the violence?
Right.
Or is it a facade?
Yeah.
Is he putting up a front to protect himself from that emotional fallout?
Yeah.
It's a tough line to walk.
Yeah.
And I think the Appalachian gorilla does a great job of keeping us guessing.
There's that one moment, right after he wakes up from the dream, and he's almost nostalgic about the violence.
Oh, wow.
Like he reflects on it and says, things were so much simpler then, which is such a chilling line because it kind of suggests that he's longing for this time when the stakes were clear and survival was just a matter of brute force.
Yeah. And that ties into the theme of what happens to society when it collapses and what happens to our sense of morality, in this world where there are no laws or social structures.
Yeah.
Does violence become the only thing that matters?
Right.
And does that change how we see right and wrong? The Appalachian gorilla, he definitely doesn't shy away from those questions.
He doesn't. And he doesn't give us any easy answers either.
Right.
It's up to us to wrestle with the moral ambiguity of Tom's actions.
Yeah.
And to decide for ourselves if he's justified in his brutality or not.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest situations, there are shades of gray.
Yeah.
Tom's not just a villain. And he's not a straightforward hero.
Yeah.
He's just a product of this environment that he's in. A man who's been pushed to the edge by circumstances that are out of his control.
And it makes you think how you would react in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
You know? Would you be able to hold on to your humanity?
Right.
Or would you just become consumed with the need to survive no matter what?
Exactly. And these are the kinds of questions that post-apocalyptic fiction is really good at exploring.
Yeah.
Gives us this space to kind of confront our deepest fears and examine what happens to the human spirit when it's facing these really difficult situations.
And 2035 does it masterfully. The writing is so immersive that you feel like you've been transported to this world.
It's not just a story, it's like an experience.
Right.
And the Appalachian gorilla is so good at creating these believable characters and putting them into these incredibly tense situations.
Yeah.
He just draws you in with these vivid descriptions, and you're left wanting more.
It's like you're right there with Tom, feeling that cold wind on your face and the adrenaline as he's stalking his prey.
And the symbolism, he uses that to add another layer of depth to this story.
Yeah.
Like the creek, for example.
Yeah.
It's not just a river. It represents all these conflicting forces at play in this world. The beauty and the brutality, the hope and the despair.
We've talked a lot about Tom and his struggles and his capacity for violence and all the moral dilemmas that he faces.
Right.
But what about the other characters in his life?
Oh, that's a great point.
Like how do they see him?
Yeah, we're only getting Tom's point of view right now.
Right.
It would be interesting to see how his wife and son view him.
Yeah.
And how their relationship has been affected by everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Do they see him as a protector or a burden?
Or something in between, right?
Yeah, it really raises the question, are his actions really selfless? Or is it all about control? Is he trying to assert his dominance in this new world?
Yeah.
And by doing that, is he pushing his family away?
Yeah, these are the kinds of questions that make 2035 so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It goes beyond the typical action and adventure story and makes us think about these human relationships and how they're affected by extreme situations. It's not just about surviving.
Exactly.
It's about those connections that bind us even when they're about to break.
And that brings us to another really important part of this story, which is the world building.
Yeah.
We touched on it a little bit earlier.
We did.
But I think it's worth diving a little deeper into how the Appalachian gorilla creates this believable post-collapse society.
And it's not just the landscapes and the lack of resources. It's the way that he hints at these societal structures that are popping up.
Yeah.
The power dynamics, all the danger lurking around every corner.
Right.
We see a little bit about the slavers, these figures who really embody the lawlessness of this new world. Yeah.
But then we also get these glimpses of other settlements.
Right.
Other survivors who might be just as dangerous as the slavers.
Yeah, and he doesn't give us all the information right away.
No.
He just gives us these little clues and lets our imaginations fill in the rest.
Right.
Which really keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah,
because you're always wondering what's going to happen next.
What's around the corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like those abandoned motorcycles that Tom finds.
Right.
They're not just random objects. They're like these remnants of a lost world, these symbols of power and freedom that have been corrupted by this new reality.
It makes you think about our world,
It does.
What would happen if something like this were to happen to us?
Right.
How would people in the future interpret the things that we leave behind?
It is a sobering thought. And the way that he describes the winter weather, that biting cold, the snowdrifts.
It's like nature itself is another character in the story.
It is.
It's this force that's constantly testing the characters,
right,
pushing them to their limits.
And it really adds to that feeling that danger can come from anywhere, at any time.
Absolutely.
It makes you realize how vulnerable humans are when we don't have those comforts and technology that we rely on.
Especially when we're up against the power of nature.
Exactly.
And, I think that vulnerability is at the core of this story.
Yeah.
Because it forces these characters to look inward and confront their own mortality and their potential for both good and evil.
Right.
We see that in Tom's violence, of course.
Right.
But we also see it in the tender moments that he has with Bella.
Right.
Even in his dream.
Yeah.
He's this walking contradiction.
He is.
Capable of both brutality and compassion.
And that's what makes him so human and relatable.
Right.
Even if we don't agree with his choices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We all have that darkness inside of us.
Especially when we're pushed to our limits.
Yeah. And the Appalachian gorilla, he doesn't let us forget that.
He doesn't. And he also doesn't shy away from showing us the consequences, the guilt that Tom carries, the nightmares that haunt him.
Right.
It suggests that even in this crazy world, there's still this need for redemption.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, is there any chance of peace or happiness in this new world?
Right.
Or is survival the only thing left?
Yeah.
Is it just a never-ending cycle of violence and fear?
That's the question that stays with you.
Yeah.
It leaves you feeling like, even if Tom keeps his family safe, there's still this bigger threat out there.
Right.
This erosion of what it means to be human.
Yeah, so we started this deep dive by asking if Tom was a hero or an anti-hero or something else entirely.
Hmm.
And it seems like the answer is way more complicated than a simple label, you
Yeah.
know? He's flawed, he's full of contradictions.
Right.
He's a product of this crazy world that he lives in.
And he reflects the world, too, you
Yeah.
know? It's brutal. It's unforgiving.
Yeah.
But there are still those moments of beauty
Yeah.
and grace.
This chapter is a good reminder that even in dark times, there's still hope
Yeah.
and connection, and the human spirit is resilient.
It's a story that really sticks with you.
It does.
And it makes you question your own values,
Mhm.
you know, your own capacity for good and bad.
And if you're intrigued by what we've talked about today,
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend checking out 2035 on Substack.
It's a wild ride.
It is.
It'll make you question everything you thought you knew about humanity.
Yeah. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
Keep diving deep.
And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.